How are you?
I'm doing fine. Is no one else here?
Yeah, so what happened was that one of them is sick, she's not, and the other one I think is away somewhere. So, but we have two people, so I guess we'll go on with it.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do it. Why not? How are you, Michael?
Good, Rabbi. Thanks for asking.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, we have two girls absent today. One of them is not feeling well, and the other one is probably, I think she traveled somewhere. So we'll have to do without them. Okay, let me just put
The
the Facebook.
former animal trainer at Ringling Brothers bought the animals when he left, and he's a rabbi in Spokane, Washington now. He wants me to come house sit for a couple for December and January. I'm thinking about doing that. He
All
has a
right.
white tiger.
Oh, okay. I think I think you better get some insurance.
Yeah.
Just in case, yeah, something like that. Okay, let me just put the Facebook on. One sec, 1 second. Uh, that's funny. That is funny. Okay. Facebook, here we go. Okay. Hope you guys had a nice Shabbat. Okay, here we go. Okay. As they say, the show must go on. All right, here we go. So, okay. Okay, so it looks like we're on 15, yeah. Okay. So it says here in Tetvav, Troknin, Vehu she'osin guma bekira. Oh, okay. So this is like a special kind of a thing. We gotta look inside the tour, you know? It's a special kind of bread that they make. So let's see in the tour. Yeah, so it says טרוקנין והוא שעוגמה בחירה ונותן בה קמח ומים ומערבין בה ונפה. So it says, right, the way they do it is like this. They make a hole inside the stove because their stove was like hollow, inside. So they made a hole there and he puts the flour inside there and umaim and water umearvin ba, and then they mix it, right? Venefa ba, and that's how they bake it, right? Voila, right? You have a nice piece of bread that comes out like that, whatever. So he says, Chayav bechala. This is obligated to take challah from there. Umbarech chalav hamotzi, and also the blessing is hamotzi. Ve'adam yotze bo yedei chovato bepesach. Also, if you want to eat on Passover, right? Matzah like this, you're good. You're good to go. Kevan shehu Beguma, why? Because he says it's in a hole, umidkabatzin yachdav, and it gathers together, nase kemo pat, so gamur. So he says it becomes like bread. So in other words, this is like a, it's like a quick bread, a recipe. You skip the kneading, you don't do any kneading here, just like throw it in and just mix it, and just boom, right? So it's like a quick, it's a quick recipe here, fast food, right? It's a fast food here. So okay, but he says tarita, right? Tarita, which it has like a lower quantity or ratio of flour. So how is that? They take flour and water, they mix it together, right? And they spill it onto the stove, right? So this sounds like pancakes or something like that, right? Crepes. The whole need pashet, right? Yeah, it's like a pancake crepe kind of thing. So he says this thing is not bread, right? So therefore we bless on this mezonot, right? But we're not talking here about something which is sweet, because that would be already change the equation. We're talking about just regular dough, white dough. But nevertheless, because of the texture, the way it's made, it's not really considered to be bread. That's what he's saying. Okay. So anyway, then he says, but on the other hand, right, if he made his meal on that, meaning what? That he had a high quantity of that stuff, right? Meaning that he had 200 grams, right? Something like that, going to the weight. Right? Then he's going to do hamotzi and birkat hamazon because the quantity can change it, right? As we already mentioned, right beforehand, we spoke about that already. So Nehama. Okay, so let's see the Bet Yosef on this. Now we got the basic idea what's going on. So let's see Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, trokenin, right? As we said, right? These things, the special thing that they make inside the stove. So it says he brings a source for this, the Bet Yosef. Perek Kitzad Mevarachim, right? Where is this in Brachot? Lamed Zayin Amud Bet. Trokenin chayavet bechala. So it says, right, that this thing is, liable for challah. You're obligated to do challah with this because it's bread. My trokenin, what does that mean? What is trokenin? Kuba de ara, right? So it says, right, it's basically, you dig a hole, and you put it inside, whatever, right? You just dump that stuff inside. What does that mean? You dump the flour and the water inside there, mix it up, right? As we said. Perish Rashi, right? Kuba de ara ose makom halal bekira, right? So that's what he's saying, right? You're making a hole inside your stove. And as we said, right? You're putting in there inside there your flour and water, right? Right? So it says it's similar to what they do with the ilfas, right? So the ilfas we already said, right? It's like some kind of a pot which is with which you cook in there dry. It's not you don't cook with the water, right? So in other words, it's using the heat or the steam, whatever it is, right, to bake something in there. Tarita petura, right? So it says, but tarita, right, is absolved from challah, right? That's the other thing that we said, right, which is the the thing which is like crepes. My tarita ika deamre gabil miltach ופרש שעה שגביל מלתח נותנים קמח ומים כלי ובחשים כף ושופכין על הקירה, right? So as we said, right, it's like a crepe kind of thing, So meaning what? That like it's like you're taking a batter, which is made out of water and flour and making it into crepes, something like that. The Katav Rosh. So says the Rosh regarding that. Teroknin chayavin bechala, right? This thing is right. If you make it, as we said, right, with higher ratio of flour, then it's like bread, So then it has also the obligation of challah as well. Grasinan velo grasinan petura, and he says that's the proper way to say it, right? It's liable for that it's obligated, and not that it's absolved. That's what it says in Yerushalmi. Troknin chayavin bechala. It also says there it requires chala. V'yomrim alav hamotzi. Also, we make hamotzi on that. Afalgav the bilato raka, right? Even though he says the ratio of flour is low, the guvla be'ama, right? Have. So it's basically, like uh it's not really, it's not really kneaded dough, right? It's something more flimsy, softer. But it says what we have here is basically something which is starting out as like a donut, and then right finishing off as bread. Shechayev b'chala, it's obligated in chala. V'gabe ha de'amar Abaye tarita p'tura min chala. And now what Abaye said, right, the other thing, the tarita, right, which is the crepes, as we said, it's absolved from chala. Katav velo dame letukri. So he says it's not really the same thing as the first example, right? As we said, there's a difference between them. Concentration of flour is higher in the first one. שאף על פי שבילתו רכה, אופין אותה בגומה שבקירה כמו שפירש רש"י, דנעשה לחם. So he says, right, that becomes like a bread because they're baking inside the stove in the right in the hollow space of the stove. כמו שפירש רש"י, דנעשה לחם. Right, so in those days, by the way, just to explain to you, the stoves were a little bit different than what we have today. You know why? Because today we're using, gas, right, or electricity with the stoves and things like that, right? In those days, what they had was they had like a box, basically. It was a box, and it was hollow, and they would put like coals inside, and then they would put on top, there was like a hole, and they would put the pot there on top, or the pan, whatever it was. So that was their stove. That's the way it was built. So the thing is that because it had a hollow space inside, you could also put something like inside there, actually. Right? That's what we're talking about over here. Instead of putting it on top, like a pot, you're putting it inside the hollow space.
How do you retrieve the item?
Yeah, good question. I don't think you should do it with your hands, right? That's probably worse than the white tiger. So anyway, so what you do is, you have like a special, like spatula, something like that, right? And you put tongs, whatever, right? You got to be careful with that stuff, right? You got to use a nice spatula, tongs, something, right? And take it out of there, so you don't get burned, right? Obviously, okay, yeah. Whatever. So anyway, let's move on. So Rashi explains the Naser Lechem aval mirtach gavil, right? Shofchin oto al akira. So he says, right, that it becomes like bread, but it says that we spill it on the into the stove. It says when we pashet, it spreads. Ve'en torat lechem, right? So that's we're talking about the crepes, right? The torat lechem alav. So it's not considered to be bread. Ve'amina tu begemara. We say in the Gemara furthermore, lamed chet amud aleph over there. Amar le Abaye le Rabbi Yosef, right? Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, Hi kuba de my mivarchin ala. So he says the same thing, right? He asks a question: what do we bless on that thing? That we bake inside the inside that stove, right? Inside the hollow space there. Amale misavrat nehamahu guvla be'amahu. So he says, what do you think? This bread, that stuff? It says no, it's not bread. Just like a batter or something. Whatever. So he says, therefore we make mizunot. Morzutra kava seudata ilave. But right, but Morzutra, this other rabbi, right, he made like a seudah on that. What does that mean? He had a high quantity of it, right? As we said, right, 4 egg sizes, 200 grams. Uvarich ilave hamotzi. So therefore, he blessed hamotzi. V'shalosh brachot. He said birkat hamazon. So when you're having a high quantity of that stuff, right, just like any other mezonot, more or less, right, you're gonna make on that already hamotzi and birkat hamazon because it's already a meal. Amar mor bora bashe ve'adam yotze ba yedei chovato b'Pesach. So he says also you can fulfill your obligation on Pesach with that stuff, right? It's bread, right? We're talking about the first one, not the second one, right? There's a difference between those two. My tama lechem oni klinan le. But he says, what's the reason why? Because we call that, right, the bread of poverty, whatever. In other words, it's pretty poor stuff. Right? Okay, you're falling right into line with the whole theme of Passover there, right? It's not high quality bread, right? Rich bread, whatever. Umashmat the tarita afilu kava alea eno mevarech, right? But he says that implies that when it comes to tarita, right, which is the crepe stuff. Even if you made, a meal out of it, eating a high quantity, you would still do mezonot. Because if not so, then what will be the difference between these two types of bread? Because when it comes to troknin, we don't do hamotzi on that. Unless he makes a seudah there. That's what it says, Rabbi Yerucham. Right, and this is not, by the way the two wrote it. Right, it's a different opinion here. So it says trokrin mevarech alav borem mezonot. It says over there, right, that this stuff, the trokrin, we make mezonot on it, right? Ve'im kava seudata alav. But if he made his meal out of it, mevarech hamotzi v'shalosh brachot, then he's going to do hamotzi and birkat hamazon. Okay. About tarita and brachin alav hamotzi, but tarita, right? We don't do hamotzi ela borei mezonot. We'll do always mezonot. U'basov birkat bracha echad min shalosh, and we do alav mechia in the end. Ad kan is the end of it. About midivrei Rabbeinu, but he says the Beit Yosef now points this out, right? That this is not the way. This is not the approach of the Torah that we read before. It's different. The trokrin, according to the Torah, is supposed to do hamotzi, even if you're eating a small amount. Even though you didn't eat like a large amount. So he says, how do you? So he says, right, where is the source for that? He says, it's a little bit, right, a little bit shaky there, right? This whole thing, right? Where does he get that from? So he says, I found in the Rosh, he writes in the laws of Chala, right? Siman Gimel, Garsinan beped kitzat mivrachim, right? He brings this Gemara that we just mentioned. Ki ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan troknin chayvin b'chala. That this rabbi said, right, that troknin is obligated to do chala. But lo garsinan patur, and we're not, right, the proper text is not to say that it's absolved. V'achita b'Yushalmi, and that's what it says in Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, trokrin chayvin b'chala, ve'omrin alav hamotzi. The trokrin, right, we have to do chala, it's obligated to do chala, and we bless on the hamotzi. Ve'adam yotzei yedei chavato b'Pesach, and also you can fully obligation for Passover. Ve'efshar she'al zeh samach Rabbeinu lichtov stam the trokrin mevarchin alav hamotzi. So it says, could be that that's the source of the Torah, that he says that we bless hamotzi on that. But he says it's not really good enough, this source. Why? Because there is to say that which Rabbi Yochanan said, Yerushalmi, the trokrin bevachin al motzi, that this has a motzi takrin, that we do a motzi. That's only if he made the meal, right? Large amount. Like we said in Didan, in our Gemara. Per ketzad mevarchin over there in this perk. So he says, even if it was, explicitly written in the Yerushalmi, then varchina alav hamotzi, that we bless hamotzi on that. Afagav de lo kavale, even though he didn't fix his meal on that, right? He didn't have a high quantity. Lahava shavkinan, right? We wouldn't maskanat in Gemara. So he says, right? Nevertheless, we wouldn't, right, abandon the conclusion of our Gemara, right? The Bavli, Didan mipnei Yerushalmi, because of the Yerushalmi, right? The Bavli always. Right, when there's a machloket between them, we paskin like the Bavli, so right, that's what we would do. So it says possible that Rabbeinu was explaining that more baravashit, that this rabbi when he said, right, he fulfills obligation on Passover with this thing. It's coming to argue regarding what we said that only if he made a meal out of it, he blesses hamotzi. But if he didn't make a meal, then not so. The leta ella is not so, right? Ella afilu lo kava mevarech hamotzi lechem min gamur. So he says, even if he didn't make a meal out of it, he's still going to make kamotzi. Why is that? Because it's real bread. The Adam, you'll say, boy, he's going to fulfill his obligation on Passover with that. My time, what's the reason why? Again, we said it's a bread of poverty, that's what we require. Upasak kamoto, and he passing like that. So he's trying to say, right, that maybe the Torah got the source from this concept here, right, regarding what he wrote. But he says, interesting, right? He says it's not the simple meaning of the Gemara. It's a little bit forced. The more so he says, why? Because this rabbi is not coming to argue. Rather, he's coming to say that the person fulfills obligation, Pesach, Passover, so he says that you shouldn't say that since sometimes it's the way to eat this this bread, the tanug matzah ashira for pleasure, that's called rich bread, right? Velo nafik ba, you shouldn't fulfill obligation on Passover. Kamash, when it comes to teach you the shapir mikre lechem moni, it's considered to be actually the bread of poverty, so therefore it's fitting for Passover use. Alternatively, the lo tema kiman the en surat patalav. You shouldn't say that because it doesn't have it doesn't look like bread. Lo yatsa bo yedecha, but that you shouldn't say that you didn't fulfill obligation because of that. Pesach on your Passover. Kamash Manan comes to tell you, but the shapi yatsa bo yedecha bato, that you do fulfill your obligation for Passover. The lechem oni achi abe. So he says because of bread of poverty, that's the way it is. Shen le'ani tanur. Why is that? Because the poor person can't afford to have an oven, right? He's really poor. Right? So therefore, what does he do? Since he doesn't have an oven, he makes a hole in the ground and makes it over there. When it comes to motzi, he says, however, so that's only if he made a meal out of it. He blesses on that hamotzi. But if he didn't make a meal out of it, then not so. So in other words, basically, the way the Bet Yosef is describing this is that basically he's saying that whatever the Tur wrote, is not the correct approach here. That's pretty much what he's saying. Okay, we'll see what the final conclusion will be here. So he says, therefore, you have to say that which the Tur wrote, that if you made a meal out of it, it's going on the first one, not on the second one, right? And if you learn it like that, so then there's no contradiction really between him and all the other commentaries here. He only comes to explain, that how do we make hamotzi on this? That's only if you made a meal out of it. But if you didn't make a meal out of it, then it doesn't make hamotzi. Tarita, when it comes to tarita, which is the crepes, since it's not really considered to be bread at all, because as we said, it's a batter. A batter is not bread. It's like more like a snack food. Or whatever. So if that's the case, I forgot the kavasudatavale. Even though he made had a lot of it, and he made a meal out of it. He would only do mezonot. That's what it seems to me. So he says this way we can push a little bit, force the words of the Torah to fit into the context, to fit into the program here. So everything should come out smooth. And he says even though simple meaning doesn't seem to be that way. Okay. Whatever, interesting, right? So anyway, you learn here something interesting though, and important for us, which is something I've told you in the past, which is that something which is fried, and not really baked, like this thing, we're talking about this crepes, So the truth is that it's not really called bread at all, as we said, because it's made out of a batter, So you're making it into a batter and frying it. Right, so that stuff really never turns out to be hamotzi. Even if you eat a lot, you can't make a meal out of that and make hamotzi and birkat hamazon. That fits into the context of what we said, before. So okay, that gives us some support, so it's good. Okay, good. Very nice. So he moves on. But I still have a question, by the way, even though, right, this solves the problem really, in terms of the blessing, right, of pancakes and crepes, right? You see from here that you can't really make a meal out of these things, no matter what you do, no matter how much you have. But the question is, what about donuts, right? Can you make a meal out of that? So it's not exactly the same thing, but we already mentioned before that there are, different types of donuts, right? There are donuts which are like just fried basically in oil, deep fry. That's one type. That's the classic type. And then you have also another type, which is, baked in the oven as well, or only baked in the oven, right? So the question is, those types of donuts, can you make hamotzi if you have a high quantity of that stuff, right? And can you make a meal out of it? So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll try to come up with an answer, on that question, right? When we conclude all this, right? This topic here, because it's very important to understand that. It's very practical, especially now we're coming to Hanukkah, right? So it's coming up, right? The whole donut thing is coming up here. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So Rambam Katab Pek Gimel. Right, so he says that. What about the Rambam? He writes in third Pek. Isash and Efet Bekarka, right? He says, right, if you had a dough and you baked it in the ground, right, as we said, right, that's the way they did it. They made like a hole in the ground, and that was like their stove and whatever. There's a hollow space in there. So he says this is like the custom of the Arabs, right? The Bedouins, right? They're always moving around, so they don't have like all the modern kitchen amenities that we have. So what they do is they just like make a hole in the ground, and they bake in the ground. This is like a common Arab technique, right? So there you go, right? Okay. So anyway, what's the story with that, right? The Rambam is talking about that right now. So he says, "Hoil ve'ena le'atzulat pat." So he says, since it doesn't, have the appearance of bread, mevarech alav moreh minozot. So therefore, you make mezonot. Ve'im kava mezonot aleh mevarech hamotzi. But he says, if he made a meal out of it, he's going to do hamotzi. That's interesting, right? So he's telling you the reason why it's mezonot, according to Rambam, right, is because it doesn't look like bread. So it must have looked like a big, mishmash, this thing, right? As we said, it's not really needed in the normal manner, so it doesn't look like bread. It's like more like a sloppy kind of thing, like more like a thick pasta or something. Not exactly the stuff that we're used to eating as bread. So that's the reason that's what the Rambam says, right? And because of that, we don't make hamotzi unless we have a large amount, 200 grams. So he says, "V'zohi kuba de arava." So it says Bet Yosef, right? This is the one that we just discussed, right? That's what the Rambam is talking about. Hamura begimal. We said the Gemara. V'nikret gamken troknin, right? It's also called troknin. About din terita, but he says when it comes to terita, as we said, which is like more like the crepes. Lo izkir lefi lo ne'emar begemara elinyan umotzi. So the Rambam didn't mention that. He says, right, the crepes. Why is that? Because that never becomes hamotzi, So he didn't mention in this category. There you go. So that seems to be, the conclusion of the Bet Yosef here, right? He wants to pass like the Rambam, right? No big surprise. That's what he usually does. So, nothing really new over here, right? Business as usual, as they say, right? So, okay, fine, but whatever. But at least we learned that, what this stuff really is. Now we understand. Okay, interesting. So, regarding before we see the Shulchan Aruch, I want to say also regarding the donuts, right? It really does make a big difference whether they're just fried or they're also baked, because there are some opinions in the Achronim, the later authorities. They say that something which is fried, never becomes hamotzi, and there's a machloket about that. But we go lenient, regarding these issues. That's the way we do. So therefore, we make mezonot. So if the donut, right, is uh if the donut is like sweet, like most donuts are in our times, so then it's going to be mezonot, for sure, right? There's no question about that. And then, right, since it's fried, it's never going to be hamotzi, even if you have a large amount. Um, but the question is, what about the one that's baked, right? So apparently, there, my educated guess would be, right, according to right, all the general rules that we stated, that if you have a large amount of donuts which are baked, that becomes already a meal. I don't think there's any question about that. It's clear as day and night, right? More or less. Yeah. So pretty much that's the conclusion, unless otherwise stated, right, in the future. That seems to be the halacha, that. So you got to know how your donut is made. That's the whole thing, right? You know, there are those, like very greasy ones, which are just fried, But then you have those nice ones, that they make like, in these like nice bakeries, Sometimes they're just baked. They're not even fried at all. They put like a nice filling in there, whatever, custard, right? All that good stuff, jelly, jam, whatever, all that good stuff, right? Cream. And right, it's so if it's fried, mezonot. If it's baked and you have a large amount, right? By the way, because those donuts are so large, you can easily, be liable to make hamotzi if you have like two or three of them if they're baked in the oven. Okay, whatever. Yeah. So what about if you're? By the way, what about if you're not sure if it's baked or fried? Let's say you can't get the information. So then we should go lenient, and make mezonot. That's it. That's the rule. When you're not sure, go the lenient way. So why is that called lenient? Because if you have to do birkat hamazon, that means you're making more blessings. So there's a concern about blessing in vain. So therefore, this is the reason why we call that lenient. Okay, good. So that's the story there. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch 15 Tetvav. Yeah, so it says here Shulchan Aruch, right? Trokli, דהיינו שעושים גומה בקירה ונותנים בה קמח ומים ומערבים בה ונפה שם, right? So again, right, we're going to reiterate the whole thing, right, from top to bottom. So the first case is, that they make, that hole inside the stove, right? Whether it's in the ground, whatever it is, right? All kinds of variations on that. And they just jam in there, some flour and water. They mix it up, right? And boom, voila, right? Comes out some kind of a monster dough, whatever, right? So he's telling you, right, that stuff, what do we make? Mezonot. Ubracha echad, and also ala michya, right? V'im kaba seudato alav, but if he made the seudah on that, right? He had a large amount, 200 grams. Mevarech hamotzi u'birkat hamazon. So then he's going to do hamotzi u'birkat hamazon, as we said, right? Okay. So that's exactly like the Rambam, right? More or less, right? And also like most of the commentaries as well. Pretty much the same. So it comes to exclude what, right? It comes to exclude what we saw in the Torah, which implied a little bit differently than this, but the Bit Yosef, went out of his way to reconcile the language of the Torah into our context here, into our approach. So it can maybe fit in with him as well, on a good day. Okay, right? So that's the story there. So then he moves on. About tarita, which is the crepes. Right? We're talking about, it's a batter, right? They make, with flour and water, right? So the water is like a higher concentration than the flour. That's why it becomes a batter and not a dough, right? So it just spreads out, right? And cooks, So it's like a pancake kind of crepe kind of thing, right? Whatever you want to call it. And alav torat lechem klal. So this is there. It's not really considered to be bread at all. It's, as we said, what's the reason why? Because it's a batter. So therefore, the blessing is always going to be mezonot. And also, right, the final blessing will be ala michya. Even if you made like a meal out of it, it's still gonna be right mezonot, no matter what. Okay, that's pretty good. So maybe we can try one more, right? Since we started a little bit late, I'll try to do a little bit makeup here, so nobody gets shortchanged. Okay, so we're going to Tetvav. So now he's talking about what? Nehama de handaka, right? Lechem shofin b'shipud. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, wow. This we don't really see so much in our times. Now he's talking about bread which is made on a skewer, like some kind of a shish kebab. Okay, that's interesting. So he puts it on the fire, and makes like a bread out of it like that. So I'll go inside the tour and we'll see, right, the exact language here. So we don't miss anything.
Is that how they make a pretzel?
No, that's a little bit different. The pretzel is a little bit different because the pretzels are baked basically, they're baked in the oven.
Uh-huh.
But this here we're talking like a barbecue, on the coals, right? So a little bit different. But anyway, right? Similar somewhat, I guess. And also the pretzels, the thing with the pretzels is that they have all kinds of additives, like oil and right, all kinds of flavors. So they're also coated with stuff. So here we're talking just a regular white dough with nothing added, just a regular thing there. Okay, whatever. Anyway, we'll see, right? What it says in the Torah regarding this contraption here. So it says, Moshkinoto b'shem, right? It says we based it with oil, right, on the outside, in order that the fire shouldn't burn it. Oh, but we coat it with right with eggs, right? Egg yolks, whatever. What's the blessing mezonot, right? So yeah, it's kind of like not too far from being a pretzel, but a little bit different perhaps because it's white dough, whatever. וכן על לחם העשוי לקותח. Also, he says, right, bread which is made to make kotach. So what is that stuff, right? This was like in the old days there was like some kind of a dip that they had, which was like a dairy kind of a dip to dip foods in there, and they would put like bread in there, like some kind of breadcrumbs. So he said we don't make it in the oven. Interesting, right? Oh, look what he says, right? They bake it in the sun. Wow. Perush aruka, right? What about if he made like a cracker? So he says, right? Ken gluska chayavet bechala. So then it's going to be liable to take challah from there. So what does that mean? He made it like he says he made it long, like some kind of a challah, right? So then it will be liable to take challah and the blessing will be hamotzi. Wow, that's very interesting. Okay, so let's see, right? This in the bit Yosef. There's definitely, I think this is the end of the chapter basically, so it's good, We're gonna probably finish this hopefully tonight, if not, next time, whatever. So let's see what we got here in the Bet Yosef. So it says here, Right. So we got two different types of things, right? We have the bread which is made on the skewer, and then we had the other thing, which was like some kind of a bread for a dip, which is not made in the oven, as we said, right? It's made it's baked in the sun. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so regarding this, right? The Sham Tarita Petura. So he says, but Yosef, it's the same source, as we said in the last halakha, same Gemara. So it says, right, that this thing is Petura min chala. It's absolved from chala. My Tarita. What is Tarita? Gemara asks, right? What is that stuff? Ika de amre gavil miltach. Ika de amre nehama dehandaka. Ika de amre lechem asui lekotach. So he brings there three different definitions of what this stuff is. Rashi explains, Pirish Rashi, the hama, the hindaka, but shofin b'shipur, as we said, right? It's a dough that we bake, right, on the skewer. Umashkinato tamid b'shemen. So he says, right, that we baste it with the oil, or b'mei betzim, right, or right, as we said, right, egg yolks, whatever. B'shemen and with oil. Yeah. So actually, what you're saying is quite correct. It seems like it's kind of a pretzel kind of thing, right? Because he's saying that even though it's made with a skewer, right, it's in the oven though, and it's basted with all kinds of stuff. So that's like very similar to a pretzel, really. Okay, whatever. So anyway, right, that's interesting. So he says, right, that it's not called really bread, that stuff. Okay, then he moves on. And then we have another definition, right, which is that it's made for, that's, as we said, right, that dip. And ofinoto betanur ela bechama. So Rashi says, right, again, that we don't make it in the oven, this thing. So it's baked in the sun. And then the Torah wrote, right, that if he made it like long, right, kind of thing, Sham tane Rabbi Chia, lechem ha'asui lekotach patur min ha'chala. So he says, right, that this bread, which is made for kotach, for the dip, is absolved from chala. Ve'hatanya chayab bechala. But the Gemara says, but wait, there's another bread which says that it's obligated for chala. Hatam kedikatan etama Rabbi Yehuda omer ma'asya mochin aleh asa ka'ochin chayavin lemudim peturim. Right. So yeah, so he says that if you made it like into a like a big thing, like a cracker kind of thing, and it's large and nice and long, right? So then it would be already like a meal, basically. Peresh Rashi ke'achin, right? So Rashi says, right, what is ke'achin? Aruka kutefet kegluskaot naot gale date de lechem asa. Right, so it says he's making it long, right, and also basted, right. So that shows, like, he means to make it like into a bread. כלימודים, כנסרים, כבעלמא שלא הקפיד על עריכתם. ובקצת ספרי רבנו כתוב, בעשה כאחין מברך עליה המוציא. So he says in some of the versions of the Torah, it says that if he made, right, this keachin, as we said, which are like long bread, right, he makes some mostly mashma badai de achis v'yale, that implies, he says, that he holds b'nikatab kan chiluk zeh, since he wrote this differentiation here, that ben asa keachin de asa limudin. So it says whether he made it into long, right, loaf, or right, v'chen katav gam ken Rabbeinu Yocham. That's what it says also Rabbeinu Yocham. Okay, what else we got here? The be'asa ke'achin mevorech al hamotzi. So right, as we said, they seem to agree that if you made it long, into like a big, thing there, a big loaf, so then it becomes hamotzi, because that shows that he means it for a meal. Katav Rabbeinu Shimshon. So it says Rabbeinu Shimshon, per kama dechalan, first per chola, amatlitin, all right, on the Mishnah, the Isa, the tchilata sufganin, the be'asa ke'achin, right? What about if, as we said, right, it starts out like a donut and then it ends up to be like, like a loaf? Nami lo mechayev b'chala. It's not really obligated in chala, he says. Interesting. Ela echad shakil mine charara ktana, vafilu v'afela, and unless he takes like a little bit, right, a little cake there, and makes it, and bakes it, he ate it like that, the asur below challah, then it will be forbidden without taking challah. Dilma mamricha kula isa, because maybe he's gonna change the whole dough like that and make it like that. About echad denaset the kotach betura, right? So if it's made for a dip, right? That's not really like a bread, It's more like a dip. So therefore, it's going to be absolved from challah. So in other words, basically, what we're saying, right? To sum up this whole idea, depends on how the shape is of this thing. If you're making it into breadcrumbs, and you're making it into a dip, so there, right? It's not really bread, and therefore it's not going to be hamotzi, and you're not required to do challah. But if you're making it into a big loaf, whatever, like as we said, right there, different story, right? Then it shows that you want to make a meal out of it, right? So therefore you're going to make hamotzi, and it's going to be required to do challah. So it all depends on the shape of it. That's what he's saying. Okay. Anyway, right? So, Yerushalmi, this was in Yerushalmi says, Isa kota chayevet bechala, that right, as we said, that if you make this dough, right, for the kotach, it's obligated to do challah. Shema timalech lasot challah, because maybe he'll do, right, make like a normal loaf out of it. V'al kocha kadesh lo tikshe ha'id brachot. So he says, that you shouldn't ask from brachot that what we learned over there. Tzarich lamar the appreciate the shakla puta beofa beor. So he took a little bit, right? Then he baked in the fire. The chashinon shema timalech lekach kishuru. So then we're concerned, right? He's going to take more, and right, and take from there already the size. Umashma, what does that mean? The size for challah. Umashma dehu adin le'inyan hamotzi. So the same thing also would be on motzi. Piskei challah the Rashba. So he says, Rashba, what is he pasking here? Katab sheyesh cholkim. Some argue with this al Rabbeinu Shimshon about regarding this. Oh, interesting. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch and we're done. There's still a little bit more, So that one we'll do next time. Is it the Shem? Yud Zayin, right? There's another one here. So let's see Shulchan Aruch and sum it up. Wrap it up here. So it says like this Shulchan Aruch. Tet Zayin, right? The Hamad de Handaka, right? So we're talking about this, right? This particular bread that we described. The Hu lechem she'ofin b'shiput, right? So it tells you now what it is, right? That we bake it, right, with skewers, right? And we baste it with oil or with eggs, right? So it's like a pretzel, basically, right? Like you said. But you know what it is? There's different types of pretzels, right? Those, like these are the pretzels, you buy with the vendors, those thick ones, and they're like hot, like that stuff, like they have those in New York City, Manhattan. You can get those,
I
right?
see those over by the Naval Museum.
Okay. Okay. Right, so yeah, I thought you were talking more like the packaged pretzels, the stuff they sell in the supermarket.
It's all I could think of that would hold on to a stick in a fire.
Right. I got you. Anyway, right. So yeah, it sounds right what you're saying. We're talking about these thick pretzels, whatever, right? Those, they're good stuff. It's a good, nice snack. It's not really a meal, right? Nobody eats this as a meal. It's like a snack, you buy, when you go out somewhere, on the street, whatever, to hold yourself over until you have dinner. Right, something like that, right? So, but they're pretty large. That's the thing, So okay, whatever. But anyway, right? And also there we have the other one, right? Which is the bread, which is made to make that dip, right? Special dip. So that's made in the sun, right? So all these things, it's going to be mezonot, right? As we said. All these types of things. Why is that? Because these are not, these are not really bread for meals, right? That's not the purpose of these things, so therefore it's a snack food, right? Whatever, or it's made to be, be put into a dip. Right? So what kind of meal is that, right? That's not a meal, right? It's a snack, all the snacky stuff. And so therefore all these things are mezonot. But as we already said, right, that if you make this thing, into something large, like a big loaf, so then it's going to be hamotzi because that shows that you want to have it as a meal. Okay, very good. So I guess we'll stop there. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. We'll see you tomorrow, Reza Hashem, and hope everybody, hope our right our members feel better. We have one person who's not feeling really well. Hashem should help her, right, Bruria, to get better. She has also surgery this week, so Reza Hashem, everything should be good with her. And we have one who's traveling, I think, somewhere, whatever. So Reza Hashem, they'll come back, but sooner or later they'll be back. So we'll see you, Reza Hashem, next time. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Baruch Hashem.